I set my alarm for 2 a.m. We meet the people attending the COVID inquiry every day. We're going to read into this more from Open Democracy, you guys. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with an article for Open Democracy with the headline that I set my alarm for 2 a.m. We meet the people attending the COVID inquiry every day. Travelling for 6 hours, spending thousands of pounds. To what lengths the bereaved families will go for justice. Larry Bernard, whose father died from COVID there. While this week's COVID inquiry will obviously be highlighting what Boris Johnson will be saying and what remarks he will be under, last week we heard from several Conservative politicians as well, from the likes of Matt Hancock, and we've also heard from others as well. There's been many people with many different voices and opinions about what their role is and what they did, statements, emails, WhatsApp messages, notes and whatnot. Throughout all of this, we have to faithfully remind ourselves as why we are doing this. We are doing this because lots of people died. People died during coronavirus. There are people still to this day who are suffering long-term sickness from coronavirus as well. It's important to remember that because they don't get mentioned anymore. And there were alleged parties taking place as well, while people couldn't meet their loved ones and see them. There was a case of chaos that appeared to have been the way that things were handled by the Conservative government. Now, obviously, the whole point of this inquiry is to establish what happened, what decisions were made, why the decisions were made at the times, who made these calls, here, what there, try it down to the minute details of everything that they possibly could have. This COVID inquiry is not about finger pointing at one single individual. This is about getting to the bottom of what they were doing at that inquiry. This is not about pressing criminal charges. I know there's a lot of people out there who feel a great deal of anger, and I feel that too. Because I lost time with people that I wanted to spend with during that time. But this is about learning from those mistakes, not pressing charges. Now, I know obviously that from this inquiry there could potentially be criminal charges, but I don't have much hope on that, but we'll come to that at the end of this inquiry whenever that comes around. It may not be for a good while, but today I want to talk about the stories that these people have to go through every day, that they go out of their way to spend 6 hours listening to the COVID inquiry, listening to every single question, listening to what these people who sit down, who took part of them, what they say, what questions they put on them, or statements, and how they respond to them. And the thing is that them, like so many other people who lost loved ones, cannot challenge them. They can't say anything to them. They can only sit from afar while they're being challenged, and it hurts. It hurts because they were the ones who made the ultimate decisions. They made those choices, and now the loved ones that we have are gone. And we ask ourselves, why did this happen? Should this have happened? And will we learn from this? And that's the thing, that's the other thing, is learning from it, guys. You know, I don't want to be political, but I have to be political. Because we are human beings, and we all make mistakes. We're not perfect, none of us are. And I think that's really important to make that point, guys. We're not perfect in any way, shape or form. But the best things that humans do is learn from their mistakes and grow from them, because you don't become a winner by just being a winner. You have to learn to lose before you learn to win. And the thing that really angers me is that this current Conservative Party refuses to accept its mistakes and its ownerships and its responsibilities. Time and time again, they refuse to accept that. The only person so far in this inquiry up to this point, at the time of recording this video, there's only one person I've heard who's actually had the gall to come out and apologise for what they've done, is Michael Gove. Now, whether you believe his apology and accept his apology is entirely up to you, but he's the one who's actually come out and apologised. I haven't heard it from Matt Hancock. I haven't heard it from Dominic Raab. I don't think I'm going to hear it from Boris Johnson in the inquiry, but we'll have to wait and see, obviously. I didn't hear Dominic Cummings say anything either. I don't feel like they are sympathetic to what they have done. And yes, of course, it was a very difficult time for any government. No one is disputing that there was a difficult time for governments. But when we see the WhatsApp messages, the notes, the statements that we have heard so far in the inquiry, shows just how out of control the government was. That it didn't have a grip on anything. And that's the thing that really upsets people more than anything, was the carelessness. The carelessness for the well-being of these people. The well-being of the British public. People's lives were in their hands by the decisions that they made. And that's what we want to know, is where was the compassion? Where was not the care? Matt Hancock said at the time that he would put his hands around the care sector. He never did, based on what we've heard. And I feel for these people who go out of their way to listen to it for 6 hours, spending thousands of pounds to hear it, because it is absolutely effing brutal for them. It really is. In the middle of the night, Barbara Herbert's phone buzzes by her bedside. I set my alarm for 2 a.m, she says, and wake up thinking, what the hell is that noise? By 3:30 a.m, Herbert, 66, is dressed and ready to leave. Buried in darkness, she gets in the car and drives to the train station in the steel town of Port Talbot, South Wales. It's 3 hours and 11 minutes before the train gets into London. Usually she reads a magazine or answers emails. She tries not to fall asleep. It's around 7:15 a.m. She arrives at Paddington Station, picks up a newspaper and heads to her favourite cafe to get her breakfast, an omelette. A few hours later, she walks into Dorland House, where the COVID inquiry has been taking place for the last 6 months. She will sit and listen to evidence from scientists, politicians and experts for 6 hours. When the day is done, she kills some time before she can get the cheap train back to Wales after 7 p.m. She drives home and falls asleep for a couple of hours until the routine begins again. Some days I wonder how I'm still standing, says Herbert, but I'm hanging in there. Herbert is one of a handful of people who attend the UK COVID inquiry almost every single day. The inquiry, which comes about as a result of campaigning from groups like COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice UK, has been hearing evidence since June in a centre in West London, watched by its chair, Heather Halliott. The first module examined how prepared the UK was. In its second module, that taking place now at Political Governance, Matt Hancock, Priti Patel, David Cameron, Nicola Sturgeon, George Osborne, Dominic Cummings, Chris Whitty and many more have all faced the inquiry's lawyers. But this week, for the first time, Boris Johnson will give evidence. The inquiry hopes to make sense of a man who, on the 21st of March 2020, solemnly told the nation, "We will beat the coronavirus and we will beat it together." But it is alleged he to have privately said, "Let the bodies pile high." Johnson will spend 2 days answering questions about his government's response to the pandemic, which has now taken the lives of more than 223,000 people. Lawyers will quiz him about Partygate, Number 10's toxic culture, and why he called the long COVID bollocks, and why under his watch so many people died. Herbert, who's originally from Australia, moved to Wales with her husband Paul 7 years ago. Her journey to attend the inquiry almost every single day began on the 12th of March 2020, when Paul fell in her home and broke his leg. A day earlier, the World Health Organization had declared coronavirus a global pandemic. Paul laid on the floor, begging me not to call an ambulance because he would catch COVID in the hospital and died. Recalls Herbert, I thought, oh, don't be ridiculous. My next door neighbour and I couldn't get him off the floor. I had to call an ambulance. I didn't have a choice. 6.5 hours later, the ambulance appeared and he was admitted to hospital in Wales. She adds, this was the start of a nightmare. A few days later, after Paul was admitted, doctors feared he may have COVID, so they moved into a ward with other patients who may have the virus. Tests came back and showed he did not have COVID, which was a huge relief to Herbert. But 2 weeks later, she received a call informing her that Paul had caught COVID in hospital. 5 days later, he was dead. That is Barbara Herbert. The COVID inquiry would begin almost 2.5 years after Paul's death. It was preliminary hearing that Herbert decided she would try to attend almost every day, a decision she recognises as extreme. I commute, she laughs. I went home, I had 3 hours sleep, I came back, I went to a meeting at the House of Parliament. I seriously think there is something wrong with me for doing that. I tried to go as much as I can, but obviously there's time commitments and costs are ludicrous for people to travel in, she adds. I make the choice to travel on a 4 a.m. train because it's the cheapest train of the day. Herbert, who is retired, estimates she has spent over £1,000 so far travelling to the inquiry. Though she doesn't like to think about it too much, the full price of a one-way train to London is £116.50, though she gets it at a discount. That's a choice that I make. The commitment to attend is important somebody does, she says. I would hate to know that I hadn't done everything possible. We've got to get this right, and if we don't get this right, we have to look at our families and future generations is making a difference. For my family, so I keep going. And of course, there's Paul. I know Paul will be very pleased that I'm doing it. So, as Barbara Herbert again, Larry Bereaved in the centre, and Silas Vosper on the right there. Herbert is not alone in the COVID inquiry public viewing room, which with its free tea and coffee and black plastic tables and chairs. Silas Vosper, 58, whose blue hair has made her small COVID inquiry celebrity, has only missed a handful of days since the preliminary hearings began. Vosper's dad, John Leaf, caught COVID after he was visited by carers after breaking his hip. He didn't get COVID, COVID came to him, she said. On the 16th of April, aged 80 years old, he died. Obviously, I don't blame anyone. People were asymptomatic. They didn't have PPE, she said. He was 80, but my mum is 89, so it does upset me when people say, oh well, he had a good innings. It wasn't my dad's time. In June 2020, Vosper was one of 6 people who went to Parliament with a 20,000 signature petition demanding an inquiry into the pandemic. I knew it wouldn't bring my dad back, but I knew that there was a second wave coming, Vosper explains. We needed lessons to be learned very quickly so that before the next wave came, we could not make those mistakes again. And then the second wave came. People started to join the group, the COVID-19 Bereaved Family for Justice, on the second wave, Vosper added. I just cried and cried. Every person that joined the group, I felt responsible I hadn't managed to save their loved ones. I'd done everything I possibly could, and it was happening again. A few days later, Vosper had missed the mainly down to campaigning commitments for other groups she was involved in, such as Fuel Poverty Action, but she also missed one day after Matt Hancock's evidence session for Module 1. The former Health Secretary tried to approach the bereaved families in the hearing room, much to their anger, and Vosper was so shaken she didn't attend the next day. I think it's quite despicable for him to try to approach them. He was the health secretary, and no matter what you think of him, there would be, if I was in his shoes, I part of me feels like I would try to do what he did, but another part of me would feel like all I'm going to do is end up hurting them more. I suppose it's part of helping my grieving process. I believe that there should be a bereaved person if that bereaved person has to be me. Then so it be it. I think we need the human element in that room. Vosper, who travels from Fulham, southwest London, also cares for her disabled son, who needs the most support at night. How does she afford to attend? With great difficulty, to be honest, she said. I'm in debt, but never mind. I'm living off my carer allowance. I just eat cheap. I live off a pretzel or some fruit. It's quite a strain, but I like helping people. Herbert and Vosper are often joined by Larry Breen, who also comes to the inquiry most days. Bowen, 63, was the carer for his father and an amputee, with whom he shared the exact same name. Lawrence Christopher Bride, he would take his father, a former railway worker of 43 years, on holiday to visit family in Ireland, as well as to France, Wales, and the West Country. They were very close. He was a very, very, very easygoing man, said Bride. Very quiet, had no badness, very kind-hearted, most considerate. He would give you his last pound if he had to walk home. When it became clear Lawrence needed consistent care, he was moved into a care home. It's there where they become more emulated from COVID, before being moved into a hospital where he later died. Bray does not believe the care home took care of his father or kept him inadequately updated on his condition. It wasn't until he moved into Charing Cross Hospital that Bray knew his father was ill from COVID. It was dreadful, says Bray. I could not believe it. It was like he had been starved to death, and I was so shocked when I saw him. The nurse said to me, Your father does know you're here. I put my finger between my father's hands and I said, Dad, it's me. And he squeezed my finger. I knew I was there at Bray, but I was in such shock. On the 20th of April 2020 at 4 a.m, Bray received a call telling him that his father had died. I never imagined I would be able to see my father again. Nothing in this life has affected me so badly from what I've had to go through with this. Bray travels from Windsor to London almost every day, waking up at 4 a.m. to secure a cheap parking spot, and spends almost around £50 to £60 a day just to attend the inquiry. If I had to walk there, I will walk. It's a sacrifice, but I have to. He goes, he tells me, to feel less alone. When I see all the other people that are there, it gives me a bit of strength, says Bray, to see that I am not on my own there. The inquiry is no easy listen, even if you haven't lost a loved one to COVID. OpenDemocracy has reported every day of the inquiry, and it is clear to anyone that to sit through it is no easy feat. So far, those watching have had to endure Hancock denying accusations from multiple people that he, as Health Secretary, repeatedly lied about having a plan to deal with COVID. They had to hear how scientists were not consulted on the Eat Out to help out. The Equalities Minister dismissed attitudes towards helping people of colour, and witnessed a childish and toxic spat between senior aides, which all took place while their loved ones were dying in hospital. At the end of the day, Vosper, Bray and Herbert will often decompress together, sometimes over a Jameson and ginger, which Bray has introduced to the other two. We can have a laugh if we can, Herbert says. It's not always a laughing matter when you're listening to some of that testimony. Some days I get cranky, other days I just sit there and think, here we go again. It's fair to say their commitment to the inquiry has prompted both confusion and concern from loved ones. Even my own family are very much like, shouldn't you put that to bed now? Shouldn't you be over it, Vosper says. I mean, everyone grieves differently. COVID death is very different. People are worried about me. People are concerned that I go every day. But I know everybody there. They're kind of like family to me. Even the people who work for the Inquiry are like family to me. I like my family. They do look out for me. Partygate. This week will be particularly challenging to watch for my bereaved. Many will still feel rage over the Partygate scandal. Revelations that Boris Johnson, senior ministers, political aides and civil servants were found to have broken restrictions at the height of the pandemic by holding gatherings in Whitehall. Johnson, Sunak and others were fined, and Johnson was eventually found to have been in contempt of Parliament, when he claimed all guidance was followed completely in Number 10. My dad died on the 16th of April 2020, says Vosper. My sister couldn't come over. A year later, 16th of April 2021, was when a suitcase full of wine was being wielded across Parliament for one of the parties. I was in Brighton scattering my dad's ashes by myself, and my sister was still in Australia. She couldn't come over. It was a huge punch in the stomach. It was like walking over my dad's grave. Herbert has a sense of what to come after reading Johnson's witness statement. She cannot legally share its contents, but she knows what to expect. I have never seen so much gaslighting in my entire life, she says. It was all fairy tales, just seriously fairy tales. I stopped reading because I thought, what's the point of trying to read any further? It'll be interesting to hear how it pans out over the course of the inquiry. At times like this, those united in grief find solace in the community around the inquiry. The COVID-19 Bereaved Family for Justice group now has around 7,000 members, including Herbert, Schultz and Bry. It has helped keep them in the darkest places of their loneliness and loss. I was very lucky, Herbert says. It focused me away from the worst part of the grief, and I contact members on a regular basis. She pauses and then adds, on a personal note, I have not found the group. It would probably have not been a good outcome for me. The inquiry will continue until at least 2025, when the first interim report sets out to be released next summer. It will be years before we see any legislative impact from the inquiry, and years before the evidence session ends. Will they all keep attending? Without a shadow of a doubt, while I've got the strength, I will, Bryce says. The government hasn't been honest with us, and if I'm fighting to the bitter end with the rest of the group, I will go. If it's another 5 years, I will be able to, I will go. Open Democracy is fundraising to pay reporters to cover their every day of the public hearing. Please support us. Guys, can you all do me a favour? If you can financially support Open Democracy, please do so. They are putting their own reporters who are not giving up their own time to be there in those rooms, taking all this in. They cover it on their YouTube channel as well. If you can support Open Democracy, please do so. They do some absolutely wonderful work, and they have been absolutely fantastic in getting the information out from the COVID inquiry. So I encourage you, if you can support them, please do so. There will be a link in the description of this video if you guys can support them. That was brutal for me to listen and to read out to you guys. That was not easy, but I thought it was important to do so as well. Rather than share my thoughts, I'm just going to say this, guys. There will be justice at some point. How we get it, I don't know. But all I will say is just keep fighting. What do you guys make of their stories? Tell me, how does it make you feel? Hopefully it doesn't make you angry. And rather than be angry, to be there to want to be there to support them, to hug them, to tell them that we're with you. Because it is very hard for them. I always say in life, try to put yourself in someone else's shoes to try and understand them. But I can't put myself in Boris Johnson's shoes. I can't understand him. There's a lot of people I can't understand, if I'm absolutely honest as well, guys. Guys, before you go, make sure you hit the like button, be greatly appreciated. Share this across social media and hit that bell notification icon so you'll be notified of when I upload another video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you all very, very soon.